Hello there, welcome to Africa Live, CCTV's new program that brings you African and global news from all perspectives. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Here's what else we have lined up for you in the next half hour. Unions in Nigeria are in a bid to block the planned privatization of oil refineries. And a scramble for tickets. Raja Casablanca fans are very keen not to miss out on their club's historic appearance at the FIFA Club World Cup final. Let's start in South Sudan. The United States President Barack Obama has warned that that country is on the verge of civil war after clashes in the capital Juba spread out around the country. Obama said 45 military personnel had been deployed to South Sudan on Wednesday to protect American citizens and property. In the meantime, 3 Indian peacekeepers have been killed in an attack on a United Nations base in South Sudan, according to India's UN envoy. A senior UN official confirmed that there was an attack on a peacekeeping base on Thursday in South Sudan's Jonglei state. Here's CCTV's Carol Oyola with more.
Jonglei State, South Sudan. The UN was unable to confirm the number of fatalities after the Akobo base was attacked. But India's UN envoy confirmed 3 Indian peacekeepers were killed.
The situation in Jonglei has deteriorated. In Akobo, earlier today, that's AKOBO, where civilians have gathered, including 32 as of last night, Lunor youth have reportedly forced an entry into the unmissed temporary operating base to reach those civilians. Fighting took place, and we have yet to ascertain the situation.
At the time of the attack, 43 Indian peacekeepers, 6 UN police advisors and 2 civilian UN personnel were present at the base. The UN spokesman said the situation in central Juba appeared to have calmed down. This allowed limited movement of UN personnel. However, the United Nations continues to receive reports of civilians seeking protection.
Following unconfirmed reports of several students killed by security personnel in Juba University yesterday, several hundred students reportedly remaining on campus have requested assistance from the UN mission in South Sudan.
In a statement, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said he was appalled to learn of the attack. The UN Security Council will meet in New York on Friday to discuss the crisis in South Sudan. Meanwhile, South Sudanese government troops battle to regain control of the flashpoint town of Bor. The conflict, which has so far killed 500 people, has alarmed South Sudan's neighbors. A team of African mediators held talks with President Salva Kiir on Thursday to try and broker peace. Carol Oyola, CCTV.
Now then, in the meantime, Sudan has appealed for peace and stability in its neighbour to the south. Sudan says it hopes calm will return to Africa's youngest state to avoid any spillover of the ethnic conflict to oil-rich areas along their common border. Conflict in South Sudan continued into its 5th day as government forces battled to contain the violence that has spread to the northern parts of the country. Sudan's foreign ministry spokesperson said the Sudanese president, Omar Hassan al-Bashir, had telephoned President Salva Kiir expressing concern over the conflict in South Sudan.
We hope peace and stability will return to the Republic of South Sudan. Sudan is definitely affected by what's going on there, considering that the security of each country is dependent on the other. South Sudan's security affects that of Sudan and vice versa. According to reports, the situation has started to return to normal, and we hope that that happens as soon as possible.
Let's bring you up to speed with the latest developments in South Sudan. Our correspondent David Lemuria joins us from South Sudan's capital, Juba, on the phone. David, what more do we know about the attack on the UN peacekeeping base in Jonglei?
Well, there's been an attack in the UN peacekeeping base in Jonglei State in Bor and also in Tibor. This attack goes seriously with other attacks that have been killed by the rebels in other towns or other towns elsewhere in the country. We have been able to talk to some of the UN peacekeeping mission here in Juba. They say some of the people, their staff have been injured there, but there's not been a clear information on how many people have been killed or how many are injured. But what we know is that the UN here is sending troops to be able to scale up security and to be able to evacuate any other civilians who were there.
Indeed. There were reports also that the fighting had spread to other parts of South Sudan, including Torit and Bentiu. What's the latest on where exactly the fighting is spread to?
Well, the war has taken a tribal inclination. There is this fear that this is a tribal war between the Nuer and the Dinka community, which is the majority tribes here in South Sudan. Now, all the regions where the Nuer are majority people, there has been fighting between the people. We have reports that in places like Pantio, people have been able to there has been fighting among civilians using the hand and weapons, and this has gone is spreading to other towns. There's fear all over the country because people don't know what to expect and what next time will come, and they're now calling on the government to be able to bring sanity and be able to stop the violence.
Indeed. Finally, David, ministers and senior officials from IGAD nations flew into Juba on Thursday. Have they met President Kiir? And if they have, what have they talked about today?
Well, the tribal ministers are in Juba. They are yesterday and they met the President Salva Kiir. And as we talk now, they are in a meeting, and the next few minutes will come out and to brief the media on the deliberation of the meeting. But what we know is that they have been able to propose a deal to the rebels. President Salva Kiir has asked that the rival Riek Machar comes to the table for negotiation. But what we know now is that Riek Machar says he's not willing to be able to have any negotiation with the government unless the president Salva Kiir steps down from government.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that update. That's CCTV's David Lemuria on the phone line from the South Sudanese capital of Juba. We're taking a short break here on Africa Live. Here's what's coming up next. Insufficient evidence. The ICC prosecutor concedes she doesn't have the necessary evidence to try Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta. And voting time. Voting opens in a crucial runoff for the presidential post in Madagascar. Seychelles is home to one of Africa's best travel destinations. Its tourism industry, however, was battered by the 2008 financial crisis. Today, though, the tourism sector and the economy is bouncing back. The question is, though, what is the secret to that change? We'll answer that question this week on Talk Africa. Welcome back. At about 10:10 GMT, you're watching Africa Live. Let's move on to the International Criminal Court. Its chief prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, is now seeking a delay in the trial of the Kenyan President, Uhuru Kenyatta. She cites the loss of a string of key witnesses, which she says has severely weakened the prosecution's case. In a statement released late on Thursday, Bensouda said she needed time to collect more evidence after one prosecution witness decided to withdraw and another confessed to having lied in a statement to the prosecutor.
The ICC chief prosecutor is now asking the judges to indefinitely adjourn the case against the Kenyan president, which was to be heard from February the 5th next year, to allow her to try and gather fresh evidence. She says she can only continue with the case once she is satisfied that new evidence is sufficient to support the case. In a statement, Bensouda says the evidence she currently has against President Kenyatta falls short of evidentiary standards required at the trial. The prosecutor, who is also prosecuting Kenya's Deputy President William Ruto and radio journalist Joshua Sang in another case, said her request for adjournment resulted from the withdrawal of an important witness earlier this month and the confession by another that he lied regarding a critical event in the prosecution's case. Several other witnesses who had been lined up against President Kenyatta have withdrawn their testimonies, citing various reasons, further weakening the prosecutor's case. The ICC prosecutor intends to use time created by the requested adjournment, if allowed by the judges, to strengthen the case against President Kenyatta. The prosecutor's office had initially sought to prosecute President Kenyatta alongside Kenya's former police commissioner Hussein Ali and former civil service chief Francis Muthaura. Judges at the court, however, failed to confirm charges against Ali, and the prosecutor later dropped all charges against Muthaura, citing frustration over the withdrawal of witnesses. It remains to be seen if the ICC judges will grant the prosecutor's request for adjournment or have the case against President Uhuru Kenyatta dismissed altogether. Alan Kiprop for CCTV.
Now then, for more analysis on the Kenya ICC issue, we're now joined live in studio by Edgar Kavulavu. He's an advocate with the International Commission of Jurists Kenyan chapter. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon on Africa Live. So the chief prosecutor has essentially applied for a postponement of the trial. What happens next?
Well, this is not the first time that the Kenyan situation, there has been an adjournment in the Kenyan situation, but this basically means that the prosecutor wants to be given more time so that she can solidify her case. She had said that the evidence before the court does not meet the evidentiary threshold. Therefore, she needs more time at least to gather more evidence.
But as I understand it from the statement released yesterday, she's essentially looking for an indefinite adjournment. Now, in the first place, how likely is that to be granted? And second, wouldn't that, in a certain sense, be a denial of justice to some extent to the Kenyan head of state?
Well, the case cannot proceed without enough evidence in court, because the ICC is a criminal court, as it were, and it really relies on evidence, and the threshold of the evidence is very important. And also you realize that one of the principles of international justice is fairness for the accused person. So it would be unfair for the accused person to proceed in a trial whereby the evidentiary threshold has not met the threshold.
But couldn't the argument be made that the prosecution office has had several years, really, to gather the evidence they require, and at this stage in time to then ask the court to go back again for more time? That in and of itself is a bit of a problem.
Well, given the developments in the Kenyan situation, the prosecutors on several occasions complained that there has been meddling, witnesses have been meddled with. So given that development, it is highly likely that the prosecutor will make such an application.
Do you see this vindicating the arguments some have made, especially in criticizing the means and the methods used by the prosecution office to gather evidence and prepare for these two trials?
Well, I won't say that it has vindicated them per se, because the right forum to weigh and measure evidence is the court. And I don't think other spectators will really want to measure the evidentiary threshold of any evidence that is presented before the court.
Finally, Mr. Kavulavu, the Kenyan justice system has failed the victims of the post-election violence, and so far there hasn't been any concrete result from the ICC. So are there really any alternatives beyond the ICC for the victims of the post-election violence?
Well, that is a situation that we remain to see as a country, because currently Kenya is in the process of putting in place an international crimes division, and if that goes through, then I think it will give the victims some sort of reprieve. We have already gone through the quite other processes, for example, domestic prosecutions, but which have failed. But again, you realize that the international court is a court of last resort, and the buck stops with us as a country to ensure that these victims get justice.
Indeed, love to leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's Edgar Kavulavu with the Kenyan chapter of the International Commission of Jurists here in Kenya. Let's take it to Madagascar now. People there are voting in this second round of the presidential election. Now, neither of the frontrunners gained a clear majority in the first round, in October's long-delayed first round. It's hoped, of course, that this vote will now bring more than 4 years of political deadlock to an end, and the international isolation that came with that to an end as well. Guy Henderson is in the capital, Antananarivo.
Polls opened here at about 6 a.m. We were outside this one in the centre of the capital, Antananarivo, as it did so. As soon as the gates opened, a steady trickle of people began to pour through here to cast their vote. 7.6 million registered voters across the country who will cast their vote at 20,115 polling stations. They'll cast 2 ballots while they're inside, one for a proposed presidential candidate, a second for the 127-seat National Assembly. That's important because those MPs will then appoint a Prime Minister, and it's widely expected that whoever wins the election as President will propose their supposed political master in the Prime Ministerial post. That is, of course, the transitional President, Andry Rajoelina, and the former President, Marc Ravalomanana, who was removed in 2009. Neither of them, of course, were allowed to run in this presidential poll. International observers here as well. We've already had a visit here by the Independent Electoral Commission, who say that all preparations have been made for a successful and peaceful vote. There are 398 international observer teams here in total, principally among them from the Southern African Development Community and the European Union. Guy Henderson, CCTV, Antananarivo, Madagascar.
Elections in the Central African Republic may be held a year earlier. That's according to the country's Prime Minister, Nicolas Tiangaye. Now, the announcement by the Prime Minister, who is currently embroiled in a dispute with the country's interim president, Michel Djotodia, appears to be a move to speed up the transition process following the coup in March. And this development comes as the United States ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, made her maiden visit to the war-ravaged state. Here's CCTV's Jane Keo with more.
Getting a first-hand account from the victims of a conflict that has shaken the world, and the U.S. given its strongest commitment yet.
We've come to hear how the people of the Central African Republic are doing and how we can help.
The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, has been a vocal proponent of U.S. intervention to stop such atrocities. And at this local community hospital where more than 400 people wounded by bullets and machetes are still being treated, the effects of the skirmishes were quite evident. But despite their current fears and predicament, like many, the victims just want one thing.
And is there anything that she would like to ask from us specifically about what would be helpful to help the Central African Republic and to help her?
We just want peace in our country. Lucy Mandazuto, who was injured during a shootout in Bangui, tells the envoy. The cycle of the violence between Muslims and Christians has claimed at least 1,000 lives, according to Amnesty International, and displaced at least 10% of the population. While the U.S. has fallen short of direct involvement, it's committed more than $100 million in support of regional efforts, and it's talking tough.
Those responsible for atrocities must be held accountable.
The U.S. also wants the Libreville and Jamena regional accords implemented. The accord called for, among others, elections to be held no later than February 2015. But the country's Prime Minister, Nicolas Tiangaye, now says those elections will be held a year earlier.
The President, the Prime Minister, and the head of the Council have agreed to relinquish power as soon as those elections occur.
Her visit came as the new African Union-led peace support mission officially began its operations in the Central African Republic. The 6,000-strong force will use all means necessary to protect civilians and restore security.
Well, the visit by the U.S. envoy and the involvement of the African Union-led peace operation have certainly raised a lot of expectations here. For now, many are hoping that the tough talk will translate into action in a country where peace and order have been elusive for decades. Jane Keo, CCTV, Bangui, in the Central African Republic.